July 3, 1944, Port of New York, 400 hours. The fog rolled off the Hudson in heavy gray sheets, thick as cream and just as blinding. Chains clinked against steel. Somewhere far below the pier, gulls screamed like wounded men. A military policeman barked an order in English. None of the women understood it, but they moved anyway. They'd learned to obey tone before words. An SS nurse named Lot stumbled forward with the others, her ankles shackled loosely to the woman ahead of her. She felt her fingers tighten around the small cotton satchel she'd been permitted to carry, contents inspected, then returned. It was all she had left: 2 blouses, a pair of wool socks, a worn-out photograph of her younger brother in uniform, and a cracked tin of powdered rouge. As she stepped onto the gangplank of the Liberty ship that had brought them across the Atlantic, the scent hit her first. Not salt, not oil, not diesel. Soap. Strong, soapy, clean. It smelled wrong. Behind her, Greta, a former Luftwaffe auxiliary, leaned close and whispered, "Disinfectant. They probably gas prisoners here too." The line jolted forward, boots clanking up the ramp. Lot didn't answer, but she clutched her satchel tighter. There were 247 German women in this transport. Most had been captured in France just weeks earlier, caught near field hospitals or supply depots after the Allies break out from Normandy. Some were nurses. Some were radio operators. A few, like Lot, had volunteered as clerical staff for the Wehrmacht to escape their factory towns and to serve the Reich. They expected humiliation, hunger, cold concrete, and harsh interrogations. Maybe worse. They'd heard stories, what the Americans did to prisoners, especially women. They braced for it. What they got was a toothbrush. The bus rattled along a gravel road in Oklahoma beneath a sky so wide it seemed unnatural. It was hard to tell if it was hot or cold. The air outside shimmered with summer heat, but the bus itself was kept chilled, humming with some hidden machinery none of them understood. An electric fan. A strange contraption overhead vented cool air. They had never seen such a thing. They were guarded, yes. 2 MPs with carbines, one up front, one in the back. But they weren't beaten. They weren't shouted at. They were told, politely but firmly, where they were going. "Camp Gruber," the sergeant had said. "You'll be processed, medically checked, then assigned barracks." Lot had barely understood the words, but she'd caught one: medically. She thought of the rumors again, of injections, of sterilizations, of what the Soviets did in the East and what she feared the Americans might do here. She was still clutching that satchel when they were unloaded. Camp Gruber looked nothing like a prison. Fenced, yes, rows of triple-strand barbed wire, and with towers manned by GIs with binoculars and rifles. But the buildings were wooden, low, painted in pale white and yellow. Flower beds lined the walkways. Flower beds. A Red Cross nurse met them at the entrance. American. Her hair was neat under a white cap, her face pale and serious. She held a clipboard like any schoolmistress. Lot flinched when the woman extended something. A cardboard box. Inside, a bar of soap, 2 sanitary cloths, a packet of bandages, a comb, and absurdly, a toothbrush. With a tiny tube of American paste, peppermint, labeled in English. Lot stared at it, then looked up confused. "For us," she whispered in German. The nurse didn't speak German, but she saw the expression, nodded. "For you," the Red Cross woman said. "You'll have dental checkups next week." Lot laughed, a single shocked sound that died in her throat. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't a ploy to lull them into dropping their guard. The Americans were organized, terrifyingly so. Within hours, the women were separated into small groups, stripped, deloused, and issued camp uniforms. Not rags, not sacks. Cotton shirts and trousers, fitted and clean, stenciled PW on the back in black letters. No beatings, no insults. They were weighed, measured, X-rayed. X-rayed. The machine looked like something out of science fiction. It hummed and blinked with lights. Greta had burst into tears when they told her to step behind the screen. Dee thought it was a sterilizer, but nothing happened. Just a picture for health records. The next morning, Lot stood in line outside a building marked infirmary. Inside, there were beds with white sheets, ceiling fans, bottles of something clear, alcohol, maybe, lined neatly on metal trays. She sat in a padded chair. A dentist in a white coat inspected her teeth, muttered something to a nurse, then handed her a paper cup of water. "Spit," he said. She did. No interrogations, no beatings, no mocking, just a man checking for cavities. Outside, as the sun climbed over the barracks, Lot felt something she couldn't quite name. Greta finally said it aloud. "They're not afraid of us." That was it. It wasn't kindness, it was indifference. The Americans didn't need to punish them. They'd already won. In the mess hall that evening, the women were fed meatloaf, actual meat, mashed potatoes, green beans, warm bread, coffee. Hot. Not watery soup, not thin gruel like on the voyage over. Actual food. They looked at each other across the long tables, afraid to ask if it was real. Lot took a bite. It was seasoned. Her tongue burned slightly. Pepper. "Better than the canteen in Bremen," someone muttered. They laughed almost shamefully. A woman named Ilsa was crying into her tray. She had lost her husband on the Eastern Front the year before. She had come here expecting to be spat on. She had expected to be thrown into a cage. Instead, she had been given a pillow. They'd been allowed to shower that night, not with cold water pumped from a barrel, but in tiled stalls with actual water pressure. Hot and cold knobs. Lot turned them both, watching the temperature change like magic. There were hooks to hang clothes. And towels. Real towels. 3 days later, the American officer gave them their orientation. His German was poor but passable. He held a stack of papers, rules, schedules, camp expectations, no escape attempts, no sabotage, follow orders, respect boundaries. But also, "You are prisoners of war. Under the Geneva Convention, you will be treated accordingly." Lot raised her hand. Her voice trembled. "You mean we won't be punished for who we were?" He looked at her a long moment. "We're not the Soviets," he said flatly. Then added, "You'll be given jobs. You'll be paid in camp currency. You can buy cigarettes, sweets, or extra toothpaste at the canteen." Toothpaste? Greta shook her head, bewildered. "Do they think we're children?" But no one laughed. They were assigned work details. Laundry, kitchen duty, groundskeeping. Lot was placed in the camp library. Yes, there was a library, German books too, some captured from U-boats, others mailed in by Lutheran churches sympathetic to prisoners. She cataloged them, labeled shelves. She found herself writing again for the first time in years. Pages of diary entries, letters to no one. One morning, while sweeping under a shelf, she found a book of American poetry. Inside the cover, scrawled in faint pencil, was a name, Margaret Weiss, Kansas City. A prisoner before her, a woman, maybe Jewish or not, it didn't matter, the world had flipped. She read a poem aloud in poor English. "Hope is the thing with feathers." She stopped. Her hands trembled. A toothbrush, hot coffee, a poem. Was this war? Was this defeat? Or had she, somehow, stepped out of Germany and into a world that had never been hers to begin with? On the morning of July 12, a notice was posted at the central kiosk near the chapel, typed neatly on cream-colored paper and pinned between a Red Cross poster and a chart of daily chores. Camp recreation program begins this week. All POW personnel welcome to participate. Music, drawing, gymnastics, and English lessons. Lot stared at the word gymnastics for a long time. At first she thought it was a mistake, some poorly translated military euphemism. Then Greta nudged her. "They're offering us art classes," she muttered. "Are we in a convent or a prison?" A few of the women laughed quietly as if laughing were forbidden. It still felt like it should be, but no one told them not to, no one struck them. And when they asked to join, they weren't interrogated. They were just handed pencils. The recreation hall was a wooden structure near the southern edge of the camp, painted white like everything else in Oklahoma's sun-faded landscape. There were no locks on the doors, just uniformed guards posted casually outside, arms slung over rifles like they were props. Inside, the light came through clean glass windows in long yellow rectangles, folded chairs, upright piano, drawing tables, and boxes of supplies. Paper, colored chalk, even charcoal. Lot, who hadn't drawn since she was 17, picked up a stick of charcoal and held it like it might burn her. The memory came unbidden, her mother scolding her for wasting time sketching at the kitchen table when she should have been sewing. "Art won't feed a war," she'd said. But now the war was feeding her and giving her art back. She drew her brother's face from memory. The lines were shaky, but the jaw was there, the curve of his cheekbone. She didn't cry, but her fingers left black smudges on the paper where the tears had nearly landed. Beside her, Greta painted a horse. Another woman, Anna, tried her hand at English. She copied phrases off a chalkboard with careful loops. "Good morning, I would like coffee." "Where is the library?" "I am a prisoner, I would like to speak to someone." Lot looked at that last sentence for a long time. She copied it too, not because she needed it, but because it felt like something important to know how to say. Just in case. The canteen became a daily ritual. They called it the store, but it was unlike anything they'd ever seen. Inside were shelves stocked with items they hadn't touched since before the war. Soap bars wrapped in printed paper, chewing gum in neat rectangles, playing cards, chocolate. Chocolate. Not ersatz cocoa blocks, real milk chocolate. Lot stood frozen, unsure. Then one of the American clerks behind the counter, a bored young GI who looked barely older than 18, held up 2 fingers. "2 tokens," he said. "Camp money." They'd been given coupons as wages for cleaning barracks and helping in the laundry. Lot reached into her pocket and handed them over, watching him drop a Hershey bar into her hand like it was nothing. She carried it like a sacred object all the way back to her bunk. She didn't eat it for hours. Not until nightfall, when the others had quieted and the barrack creaked under the weight of silence. She split it with Greta. It tasted like a memory they hadn't had yet. Sunday came, and with it, mail. 3 days earlier, they'd filled out carbon paper forms for letters home. Limited to 25 lines, all in block letters, censored but still astonishing. Lot had stared at the blank lines for an hour before writing anything. "I am alive, I am safe, do not worry." She hesitated on the next sentence. "We are being treated well." She didn't know if that would be believed. Then at the bottom, "They gave us toothbrushes." She imagined her mother reading that line, staring at it like it was code for something unspeakable. But it was the truth. The letters were collected in a canvas sack. Then, astonishingly, replies came, weeks later in the same carbon ink script through Red Cross channels. Her mother had written back. Her brother was missing in Russia. Her father had been conscripted. But she was alive. She'd read the word toothbrush and written, "Are you truly safe? Write again soon, I don't understand." Neither did Lot. Work expanded. The women were offered new details, tending gardens near the officer barracks, sorting mail, helping in the sewing repair shop. One day, Lot was summoned to the base's external infirmary, not as a patient, but as a translator. A new group of German male POWs had arrived. Combat engineers captured near Cherbourg. One had broken his leg. The American doctor couldn't understand his description of the pain. Lot was brought in. She translated. She didn't look the man in the eyes. He was Wehrmacht. She had been clerical, but still they were of the same war. Later he asked her in disbelief, "You work for them?" She hesitated, then answered honestly, "No, I survive." He said nothing, but the silence was louder than scorn. That evening back in the barracks, they were issued fresh socks. The inventory officer, an American woman from Arkansas, carried a crate full of cotton socks, rolled neatly in pairs. "You wear out shoes, we get you new ones," she explained. "Same with socks, can't have you freezing come winter." Greta said it first. "This can't be real." Lot agreed, it didn't feel like it. Every kindness became suspect, every comfort felt like bait. And yet the days passed, no traps sprung. No brutality arrived. One evening, thunder rolled across the plains. Rain followed, heavy and warm. Some of the younger women rushed outside like children. They hadn't felt rain on bare skin in months. They danced. One slipped and fell, laughed. An American guard, smiling faintly, called out, "Don't break anything. I don't want paperwork." Lot watched from the doorway. She didn't dance. But she smiled. The chapel remained quiet most days. Some of the women avoided it, unsure if the American cross on the altar was for them or against them. But one evening, Lot stepped inside. There were candles, a worn piano, pews scrubbed clean. A chaplain, older, mustached, gentle, offered a Bible in German. She declined, but he didn't press her, just said, "It's here if you want it." She never took the Bible, but she returned to the chapel each Sunday. Not for God, for quiet, for space, for something unspoken. One afternoon, a woman named Karen collapsed during laundry duty. Heat stroke. She hadn't drunk enough water. The Americans rushed her to the infirmary, placed her on a cot, cooled her down with fans. They called in Lot again, to calm the others. "No punishment," she translated. "She's being cared for." They nodded, some of them crying, not because they feared for Karen, but because they remembered. Back home in Germany, collapse meant weakness. Here it meant aid. Autumn crept in slowly. By mid-September, the mornings were crisp. The guards began wearing jackets. The women were issued heavier uniforms. Then came something entirely unexpected. A new shipment of supplies arrived, among them small boxes marked TOILETRY. Inside, fresh toothbrushes, new soap, tins of talcum powder, sanitary napkins, even hand lotion. Lot stared at her box, then at the label. Property of U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps. She laughed bitterly. The Reich couldn't keep her village fed in 1943. But now, as a prisoner, she was issued hand cream. What madness was this? Greta said it aloud that night, sitting on her bunk under the single bulb overhead. I think they're trying to prove something." Lot looked up. Greta continued, "Not just to us, to the world. They want us to carry it back, after the war, what they did, how they treated us. As a warning maybe, or as a message." Lot nodded slowly. It was working. Because every night she lay down on a real mattress, on clean sheets, her stomach full, her hands smelling faintly of peppermint toothpaste, she thought of home. And how little home had cared for her. As October arrived, rumors spread. The war was turning, Paris had fallen. The Russians were pushing harder in the east, the Reich was retreating. But here in Oklahoma, the world stayed eerily calm. Outside, leaves drifted across the gravel roads. Inside, prisoners read American novels in translation. They played checkers. They played music. One of the women had found a violin in storage. She played Schubert. The guards listened quietly through the open windows. And still every morning, The women brushed their teeth with American brushes and American paste, because in this war, even hygiene had become a kind of power. And Lot was beginning to wonder, had they been fighting the wrong enemy all along? By mid-October, Camp Gruber's German women had become, by all outward appearances, a functioning small town, a strange one fenced and watched but eerily ordinary in its routines. The 6:00 a.m. bugle still woke them every morning, but what followed no longer resembled punishment or even containment. They woke in bunkhouses they kept immaculately clean, with floors they polished on hands and knees every Sunday, not because they were ordered to, but because pride had returned. It had seeped in through the soap, through the shoes, through the damned toothbrushes. And with it came something even stranger, identity. Not Nazi, not enemy, not victim. Something in between. Lot had begun teaching English twice a week. It had started informally, a few women asking about words from signs, how to say certain things, how to write letters in American script. The camp sergeant in charge of POW services noticed and offered her an actual role. They even gave her chalk. So now, each Tuesday and Thursday, in Barracks 12, 24 German women sat on wooden benches with dull pencils in hand, while Lot wrote across the blackboard. This is a door. This is a window. Where are my shoes? She taught them sentences she never thought she'd say, simple things, childlike things. I brush my teeth every morning. The first time she wrote it, someone snorted. Half the class laughed. But they all copied it down. Toothbrushes had become something of a code word, a way of measuring the gap between what they'd expected and what they'd found. They joked about it now, mocked themselves for being afraid, but under the jokes was a strange mix of shame and relief. And something else none of them dared name. Gratitude. One morning, while teaching verb conjugation, the door creaked open. An American officer stepped in, not the usual camp sergeant but someone higher, colonel's rank. The class froze. Lot stood. The officer, a tall man with a southern accent and clipped words, surveyed the blackboard. He narrowed his eyes at the phrase. I am not a soldier. He read it twice, then looked at Lot. You teach this? Yes, sir. Why? She hesitated, then replied, because it's true, most of us were never soldiers. The colonel grunted, make sure they know that. Then he left. The door clicked behind him, silence returned, but something had shifted. Later, one of the women asked, do they think we're dangerous? Lot didn't answer, because she didn't know. By November, new supplies began arriving. Winter coats, thick wool blankets, scarves, gloves, earmuffs. They weren't surplus, they were new, issued. They came in crates labeled for use in North Africa and Italy, diverted, apparently, from the front. To them. To the enemy. The guards joked about it. You're getting treated better than some of our own boys, one GI muttered while handing out mittens. Greta snapped back, then send your boys here. He laughed she didn't. But she wore the mittens. Everyone did. The library expanded too. The Red Cross had sent books, American novels translated into German, Mark Twain, Steinbeck, a few Hemingway short stories. Lot began reading them at night. She started with Of Mice and Men. When she reached the ending, she sat outside on the steps in the cold, the book clenched to her chest, trying not to cry. It was a mercy killing. That's what the American had done in the story. A kind of love disguised as violence. She wondered how many Germans would understand it that way. She wasn't sure she did. Thanksgiving came, and the Americans held a feast for themselves. But afterward, they sent trays of leftover food to the women's barracks. Turkey. Actual roast turkey, cranberry sauce, cornbread. Some of the women didn't eat it. Greta poked the cornbread suspiciously. It's not even bread. It's sweet, said Elsa, confused. It's warm, Lot murmured. It's American, Anna said flatly. No one had seconds. They didn't want to seem greedy. But the tray was empty by sundown. Then came the news. The Americans posted a notice at the main building. Repatriation program to begin in 1945. POWs may be transferred or returned based on health, skill, or agreement. It hit them like a gunshot. Return. Go home. But what was home now? Germany was losing. Berlin was bombed weekly. The Eastern Front was collapsing. And these women, who had been afraid to even admit defeat, now realized they were no longer just prisoners. They were witnesses. And some were afraid of going back. That week a fight broke out in Barracks 9. 2 women, one from Hamburg, one from Dresden. The first had joked about staying in America, about hiding, finding a way to disappear. The second had accused her of betrayal. "You're happy here," she screamed. "You like being a prisoner." The first one slapped her. It took 2 guards to separate them. No one was punished. But the silence afterward felt heavier than any sentence. Lot heard about it the next morning. She didn't speak. She just walked outside into the frost-laced morning and brushed her teeth. The toothbrush had become part of her identity now. Every morning without fail. The same soft bristles, the same circular motion. She even flossed using thread from the sewing room. She remembered once being proud of her uniform back in Bremen. The blue-gray skirt, the badge, the armband. She had felt important. Now she wore a cotton shirt with PW on the back and felt more human than she had in years. One day, she saw her reflection in a tin mirror nailed above the camp sink. She looked normal. Not angry, not proud, not bitter. Just clean. In late November, a group of American schoolchildren visited the camp. It was part of a local civics program. "See the enemy," one flyer had said. But when the children arrived, hand in hand with their teacher, they didn't see monsters. They saw women. They saw Lot teaching English. They saw Ilsa in the garden, planting winter vegetables. They saw Anna painting a mural on the wall of the canteen, an eagle, wings outstretched, not German, not American, just beautiful. One girl asked, "Why are they here?" The teacher said, "Because wars are messy, sweetheart." The girl tilted her head. "But they're brushing their teeth." Everyone laughed. Except Lot. Because the child had said it with such simple wonder. Like it was the most civilized thing in the world. By December, the women had begun preparing their own Christmas celebration. They were allowed access to paper, scissors, and string. They made decorations, folded stars, carved tiny nativity figures from soap. The Americans gave them a tree. A real tree. A pine, cut and hauled in by 2 guards who said nothing, just dropped it in the center of the recreation hall and walked away. Lot decorated it with buttons and ribbon. On Christmas Eve, the camp commander himself, Major Winchell, walked into the chapel during their candlelight hymn. He stood at the back, hat in hand, listened, said nothing, then left. And no one stopped singing. Lot sat up that night long after the lights were out. She couldn't sleep. Not from fear. From confusion. She wrote in her journal, "They gave us a tree, they gave us music, they gave us room. I do not understand. We were prepared for shame. We received soap. Is that victory? Is that defeat? Or is it something else?" She paused, then underlined it. "I am still a prisoner, but I feel more free than I ever did under the flag I once saluted." She stared at the sentence, then tore the page out, folded it, and tucked it behind the toothbrush in her satchel, just in case anyone ever asked her, years later, what the war had taught her. She wouldn't tell them about bombs or borders or speeches. She'd show them that toothbrush and say, this is what beat us. January 1945 came with snow. Not the deep, suffocating blizzards of Eastern Europe, but soft, dry Oklahoma snow that blanketed the camp overnight like a veil. For most of the women, it was the first winter they'd spent outside of Europe since the war began. Lot stood outside the barracks at dawn, wrapped in her issued wool coat, watching flakes settle onto the barbed wire fence. It almost looked like lace. Inside the mess hall, the coffee was hot, the eggs were powdered, the bread still warm. American efficiency never seemed to falter, even in cold. The guards now wore heavier gloves. Some of the younger ones carried thermoses of steaming coffee, offered without hesitation to prisoners during longer work shifts. The Geneva Convention, they now realized, wasn't just a document the Americans followed. It was a weapon. A quiet, devastating weapon. It stripped them of excuses. It shattered the myth of righteousness that they had clung to in Germany, that they, the women who served behind the lines, had only supported logistics, had only followed orders, had only been doing their part. Now they saw how little that part had mattered. Because here, where they were called enemies, they were treated with more humanity than some had known in their own homes. And that in its own way was harder to survive than hunger. Rumors from the front grew worse. German newspapers, distributed weekly at the camp's request and censored but legible, told of heroic resistance at the Ardennes, but whispers among the guards said otherwise. That the Americans had pushed back hard. That the last German offensive had failed. That Hitler was growing desperate. Lot read both versions. She believed the guards. One day in late January, an American lieutenant teaching an English class casually mentioned Dresden. Lot flinched. Bombed, he said, burned whole city, thousands dead. Greta gasped, Anna turned pale. The class ended early that day. Later that night, by the campfire pit behind the laundry barracks, Lot sat with Ilse in silence. "Do you believe it?" Ilse asked. Lot said nothing. Because she did. And she didn't know how to grieve it. February arrived with a strange gift, a projector. It came in a wooden crate with U.S. Army stamps, rolled in by two technicians who spent an hour fussing with wires and reels. "We're showing a movie," a guard announced. A movie. The women gathered in the recreation hall that night baffled. There were whispers of propaganda, fear of humiliation. Instead, the lights dimmed, the reel flicked to life, and on the canvas sheet hung at the front of the room appeared the Philadelphia story. Cary Grant, Katharine Hepburn, laughter. American music played, women in beautiful gowns, men in tuxedos. A world so clean, so untouched by war, it felt like a different species had created it. Lot watched in silence. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the feeling. And for 92 minutes, she forgot the wire outside. She forgot the flags. She was just a woman again, watching a world she never knew existed. When the lights came back on, no one spoke. Even Greta had tears in her eyes. A week later, Anna asked the camp chaplain if she could repaint the canteen mural. "Why?" he asked. She hesitated. "The eagle feels too heavy." The chaplain nodded. "What do you want instead?" She thought for a long time, then said, "A meadow, no fences." He agreed. July 3, 1945. Exactly 1 year to the day since they had stepped off the ship and into the fog of the New York harbor, Lot stepped onto German soil once more. but it no longer smelled of salt or steel. There were no soldiers shouting orders, no swastikas flapping from buildings. There was no order at all, only rubble. They docked in Bremerhaven under a pale gray sky, with the gutted ruins of the city visible beyond the port cranes. Smoke curled from collapsed chimneys. Gulls wheeled overhead, but even their cries seemed uncertain, as if they too weren't sure where home had gone. A British MP waved them forward, his face unreadable behind a clipboard. No fanfare, no flags, just a new kind of silence, a German one. They disembarked quietly. The American officer who had accompanied them across the Atlantic stood at the dock's edge and gave a small nod. He didn't smile. He just said, "Take care of yourselves." And then he turned back onto the gangplank. Lot never saw him again. But in her satchel, wrapped in a folded handkerchief and nestled between a book of American poems and a letter from Illinois, the toothbrush remained. The symbol. The line. The proof. She didn't throw it away. She couldn't. Because as she looked out over the ruins of the place she once called home, it struck her fully for the first time. The toothbrush had outlived the Reich. Her hometown near Bremen was half demolished. The bakery was gone. The church had no roof. Her childhood street was split down the center by a crater where an air raid had dropped its payload, intended for a factory that never existed. Her father was dead. Her mother had taken refuge with distant relatives. Her younger brother, captured on the Eastern Front, was still missing. The house remarkably still stood, half-charred, windows boarded but upright. She stood in the doorway with a suitcase in one hand, her satchel in the other, and for the first time in months felt truly lost. She had prepared to return to Germany, but she had not prepared for it to be gone. That night she unwrapped the toothbrush and stared at it beneath the flickering candlelight. Its mint smell was long gone, replaced with dust and wood smoke, but the shape was still there. The American letters etched into the handle, U.S. Army Standard Issue. She remembered the guard's words. "You taught us to." Had she? She wasn't sure, but she knew she had changed. She brushed her teeth that night with boiled rainwater, standing over a cracked basin, using a splinter of mirror to guide her hand. And she cried, not because she was home, but because she knew now what the word could mean and what it never had before. In the months that followed, the American occupation reshaped everything. Currency changed, schools reopened, ration books replaced rations, and the trials began. Lot kept her head down. She took a job helping translate for British officials investigating wartime logistics. Her experience in Camp Gruber made her valuable. She didn't ask questions. She didn't talk much. Until one day, she was called to interview a former Nazi administrator, someone she had known by reputation in Bremen, a man who once ordered the closure of a Jewish hospital for wasteful hygiene standards. When she entered the room, he didn't recognize her. She asked him the questions. He answered curtly. Then she handed him a toothbrush. He stared at it. "What is this?" he sneered. "Proof," she said. "Proof of what?" "That the people we called savages knew how to be human, while we did not." He scoffed, refused to answer further. But she didn't need his confession. She had the bristles. In 1946, Lot emigrated. She de-applied through a church program in Illinois, the same one that had once sent her soap and poetry. She didn't know who had sponsored her, but someone had. In May of that year, she arrived in Springfield, wearing a second-hand coat and carrying only 2 bags. And the satchel. She was given a small room above a Lutheran church, a job as a secretary, and a promise that if she worked hard, no one would ask too many questions. She didn't try to hide her past, but she also didn't tell all of it. Who would believe it? Who would believe that a prisoner, an enemy, had been offered dignity, comfort, safety, and a toothbrush? So she lived quietly, learned quickly, worked tirelessly, and each night she brushed her teeth. In 1951, she became a U.S. citizen. The officer administering the oath asked if she wanted to change her name. She said no. "Lot is fine," she said. "It reminds me who I used to be." He nodded, stamped the paper, handed her a small flag. She cried. Later that night at home, she unwrapped the same old toothbrush. The bristles had yellowed, the handle was chipped, but it still fit in her hand. She held it not like a relic, but like an anchor. It wasn't just a hygiene tool. It was a line drawn through history, a line between what she had come from and where she had arrived. In 1960, she finally returned to Germany for a visit. She stood outside the Bremen train station, looking at the rebuilt platforms. Children played with plastic toys. A man sold pretzels. Teenagers wore blue jeans. American music played from a cafe radio. The world had moved on. No one remembered the women who came back from Oklahoma with stories of showers and chocolate and hot coffee, of kindness, clean beds and socks without holes. No one wanted to hear that. Everyone remembered the bombs, the rubble, the starvation, but not the toothbrushes. Those didn't fit the story. So Lot didn't tell it anymore. She just carried it, quietly, always. In 1983, at a Veterans Museum in Springfield, Illinois, a small exhibit was unveiled. Axis POWs in America, 1940–1946. Inside a glass case were photos of Camp Gruber, barracks, mess halls, letters, a copy of the Geneva Convention, a dented cafeteria tray. And placed carefully in the center, with a typed card beneath it, was "Toothbrush, U.S. Army issue. Used by a German POW in Oklahoma, 1944–1945. No name. No plaque. But visitors stopped. They stared. Because it didn't look like a weapon, or a victory, or a defeat. It looked ordinary. And that was the point. In her final years, Lot never married. She never had children. But she taught Sunday school, and every year she told the same story. About soap, and pencils, and peppermint paste, and how, once upon a war, her enemies gave her something her homeland never did. A clean mouth, a clean bed, a clean conscience. And how it all began with a small, white toothbrush, tucked into a cardboard box by someone who never knew her name. In 1995, she passed away quietly in her sleep. In her will, she asked to be buried with one item in her hands. The chaplain found it, wrapped in an old handkerchief in the top drawer of her dresser. A worn toothbrush. Handle cracked, bristles gone. But still whole. Still real. Still telling the truth. And in the end, that was all that remained. Not hatred, not slogans, not borders. Just a woman who had once been a prisoner, and who had learned, through the quiet dignity of soap and toothpaste, what true freedom felt like, and who never forgot it. Ever.